All right, listeners, I think you know that we are part of the Radiotopia network, which is basically a network built on the idea that you should support the most creative, independent audio makers around. No one, and I mean no one, embodies the Radiotopia ethos more than Benjamin Walker and his show Theory of Everything. Benjamin, who I've known for a long time, has been making beautiful, personal, sprawling audio documentaries for decades that help us understand the very strange world we live in. And now he has a new series called Not All Propaganda is Art. The new series goes back to the 1950s, when Western security agencies like the CIA paid artists, writers, and intellectuals to fight the cultural Cold War.
The CIA funds were free. I mean, no one was told what to say.
Gloria Steinem, activist who sees the CIA as a sort of enlightened pal or rich uncle, there is another viewpoint.
Look, if you're listening to this show, I know you like secret histories. I know you like a mix of culture and politics and shadowy figures. So what are you waiting for? Not All Propaganda is Art from Benjamin Walker. You can find it now wherever you listen or at theoryofeverythingpodcast.com. This episode is brought to you by Progressive, where drivers who save by switching save nearly $750 on average. Quote now at progressive.com. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and affiliates, national average 12-month savings of $744 by new customers surveyed who saved with Progressive between June 2022 and May 2023. Potential savings will vary. Hello and welcome to This Day in Esoteric Political History from Radiotopia. My name is Jody Avergan. This day, March 15th, 1991, this story actually took place on March 16th, important to get the date right, but on this day in 1991, a Korean-born merchant shopkeeper, Soon Ja-do, shot and killed 15-year-old Latasha Harlins after accusing her of stealing a bottle of orange juice in her store. Latasha Harlins was not stealing the bottle of orange juice. She was intending to pay for the orange juice. She died after being shot in the back of her head, holding the $2 in her hand that she was going to use to pay for that bottle of juice. No surprise, this incident caused a tremendous amount of uproar and heartache in South Central Los Angeles. Any killing of a young girl would, but it also tied into growing tensions between Korean and African American communities. And then about a year later, as the trial over Harlan's death was coming to a close, all of this kind of folded into another incident that many of us know, the Rodney King beating, trial, riots, which were, of course, about police and the black community, but also about these lingering tensions within South Central Los Angeles as well. So this is a story about the death of Latasha Harlins, but also the roots of the LA riots that many people may have not known about or forgotten. So here to discuss, as always, are Nicole Hammer of Columbia and Kellie Carter-Jackson of Wellesley. Hello there.
Hello, Jody.
Hey there.
Before we get going, there was a documentary that came out last year, a short doc. It was Oscar nominated. It is on Netflix. It's called A Love Story for Latasha, and it's really beautiful. I just watched it in preparation for this, and it makes a really important choice, which is just to center her, and it's just about her. It's not really about her killing, certainly not about the larger political stuff that we're going to get into, but it's just it's lovely. She seemed like she was a really wonderful young girl with big dreams. She wanted to be a lawyer. She had a loving family, and it's just in the same way that this story is resonant for so many reasons now when we hear about killings like this, to stop and spend some time about the human being at the heart of the story is always really important. So I would recommend go watch that film if you can. Any thoughts about the incident or Latasha, and then we'll get into the sort of larger political echoes and swirling themes?
I mean, this was a huge, huge moment, and the community in LA was just grief-stricken. And I think that grief was even more pronounced that her death became overshadowed by Rodney King. And that's not to say that one is more important than the other, but oftentimes when you have these big controversial shootings, Black women are almost always pushed to the margins of the movement. So there's a big campaign, hashtag say her name, to sort of, revive a lot of the lost names that have been rendered invisible because their stories have not been told or because their stories have been overshadowed. But also say her name is just about what you talked about too, Jody. It's like, who were these people and what were their dreams and what were they trying to accomplish and how were they loved and all of the things that make people complex and human, I think is also something that gets lost too. We forget that Latasha was a child.
Yeah. And I think that there's a really important resonance in the story with Trayvon Martin's murder, right? The images that resonate from his murder were the Skittles and the iced tea, which is such a kid thing to snack on. And here it's just like, it's a bottle of orange juice. It's $2. And that she lost her life over that is so heartbreaking, and it just emblemizes the meaninglessness of it. Like her life was worth more than $2, and it's those very poignant details, I think, that sometimes make a story like this stick in your mind.
And much like a lot of these other stories, including Trayvon, where there was audio there, I think that's one of the reasons that the Trayvon Martin story is so politicized, is because there is not video. But in this story, there is video, there's security camera footage, and you can see, her being shot in the back of her head. And then the information about it was just a bottle of orange juice and so forth. But, again, like, that is just, there were no cell phones back then. There weren't cell phone video everywhere, but that is the thing that has changed. Is just these things are showing up on video more and more, and we see incidents that have always been happening. We see them, but this feels like it's presaging that, where this video was shown immediately on the nightly news, and so many people, when you hear them talk about this story and why it hit them, obviously a tragic killing, but also just seeing that video and having that evidence to look at really sets things off in a different way.
And you set that side by side with the Rodney King beating, because that was captured by a home camcorder, a technology that just wouldn't have been around even just like 10 or 15 years earlier. So it also puts you in this particular moment in time when there are these new technologies that are allowing people to witness these crimes in different ways.
You want to talk about the trial, which is about a year later, but again, it's like you have these parallel way these things play out. We see it play out now. It's like you have this initial incident, it bursts up, there's a conversation, and then you go to trial, and it's like a year later, then it bursts out again, and it's and that's sort of what happened with Rodney King too. There was the beating and the conversation around the video of the beating, and then it went to trial, and then the verdict. And here, the verdict about a year later in '92 is, police very quickly claim there's no attempt at shoplifting. A jury finds the shopkeeper guilty of voluntary manslaughter, but what ends up being the verdict?
So voluntary manslaughter would have had a maximum sentence of 16 years in prison. And instead, the Judge Joyce A. Carlin, gives due probation. And when that happens, people are incredulous at this slap on the wrist at the death of a person when she's been convicted of manslaughter. And so there was outrage in the city. Riots, or what Elizabeth Hinton calls rebellions, break out, and people start to protest, and they start to throw Molotov cocktails. They start to destroy Korean businesses. I think a big part of this backstory too is just Black and Korean relationships in Los Angeles are something that doesn't get discussed, that there's this real dynamic about how Black people are treated, how Asian immigrants are treated, how there's a rush to not be at the bottom. And so the tensions over who controls these stores and who controls the streets and how these communities were able to find solidarity or not really spills out into the streets during these rebellions.
And it gets folded into national politics in a really destructive way. So this verdict is coming down in 1992, and this is when Pat Buchanan is running for the Republican presidential nomination, and he goes to Los Angeles and he meets with Korean shop owners and holds them up as the defenders of the city of Los Angeles, really pressing that sore point in this moment of anti-Black politics, where he is trying to drive a wedge even further between Korean shop owners, Black Los Angelenos, and, of course, the white voters he's appealing to.
Yeah. I mean, I did this series with 30 for 30 about Donald Sterling, who was this awful basketball owner, but he got his money as a slumlord, really. And Kellie, to your point, gentrifying a lot of Black neighborhoods and often, bringing in Korean tenants and pitting groups against each other and sort of, ties into a changing city, gentrification, the rush to not be at the bottom of the ladder, divide and conquer, all that stuff. And, again, it folds into then... It's a story, and I want to acknowledge that, and it's certainly I think a lot of people in Los Angeles of a certain age will remember the story, but it does quickly get folded into or subsumed or whatever word you want to use with the Rodney King incident. And I just remember as an outside observer to Rodney King, in the riots around that, which are obviously about a police beating, you also then have just kind of a community that is at the end of its rope, and there are a lot of the fires and a lot of the arson that took place during that did target Korean businesses, including the store where this incident took place, Empire Liquor. But I remember as an outside observer kind of being like, wait a minute, what's going on here? What is this Korean American, African American dynamic that I don't really get? And why are these stores being torched? And I didn't realize, I don't think many people realize that the roots really were in this incident.
I also think that, one of the first things immigrants are taught when they come to this country is like Black criminality, to associate Black identity with crime or with trouble. And so even when you have what could seem like a harmless or even a meaningless exchange, buying orange juice, the question or the barrier is always, you're trying to steal from me, you're trying to take from me, because Black people are criminals before they can commit any crimes. That's like the default identity. And so, when that accusation is made at Latasha, she doesn't have a societal framework that will support her truth, right? Everything is pitted to believe that Black people are criminals. And so even when it's found out that that was not the case, we're still not endeared to pity Black people or to create, punishment that would fit that crime, because we still don't believe of Black people as deserving of those kinds of justices. So, I mean, it's really problematic when you look at this entire picture, and not just this picture, but like how this picture gets reincarnated in so many different instances over the 90s and the 2000s and our present moment.
Right, because this is the height of the war on crime in particular. And those images, whether it's, from the Central Park 5 or the subway shooting in New York in 1984 or the uprisings in Los Angeles, it's just a script that plays out over and over and over again, where you're asked to think of the fears of the police or to think of the fears of the Korean shop owner, and not to think of the terror that a 15-year-old girl feels when she's just like sauntering up to the counter and suddenly the shopkeeper grabs her and starts fighting with her. I think that's a really important perspective.
Yeah. And, to come back, as we wrap up, to come back to what you were saying, Kellie, about there are people who've said her name and kept her name alive, and I think it's important to acknowledge that. I mean, there is some hidden history here too, but I think for a lot of Angelenos, this is a relevant story in many ways. But some other interesting stuff. Tupac dedicated "Keep Your Head Up" to her. Mentioned her name in a number of songs, including has a line where he says, "Latasha Harlins, remember that name, because a bottle of juice ain't something to die for." I wonder if that's the real first sort of moment of remember that name, say the name, say her name. I mean, I wonder if it comes from Tupac in 1993. And then
I remember that song. I remember that song very well.
Well, I mean, that was a huge song, and
it was an anthem. Keep Your Head Up was like Kendrick Lamar's "We're Gonna Be All Right." It was a musical anthem to sort of encourage you in your grief.
Yeah, for it to have this sort of political underpinning is always really interesting. I think music often works that way. You don't realize how political it is, and you think it's more, it's a love song or whatever. But it has that dynamic, I think, in an interesting way, too.
Yeah. This is also, I mean, there are layers to this, but I just remember that this era of the 90s, there's like gangster rap, and hip hop also has this horrible reputation for being misogynist and all of these different things. And so even with Tupac's song, it felt exceptional in the sense that it was not rapping about, like, you know, women as hoes or bees or whatever, in this way, the tropey way that hip-hop was being dragged in the 90s. This was a song I think that most people could appreciate, but it still gets lost in the politics of how hip-hop was rendered.
Yeah.
Well, in addition to Tupac, you know, her family is also working hard to make sure that people remember this girl, right? Because she was lost in so much of the other stuff that was happening in Los Angeles and in the United States at the time. And so they are constantly holding vigils outside of Du's residence every year on the anniversary of her sentencing. You know, she gets sentenced to probation. And actually, Denise Harlins, her mom, interrupts an awards ceremony at the Biltmore Hotel for Du's defense attorney. And it was just about making sure not only that people remembered her daughter, but that the people who she felt were responsible for there not being justice in this case, that they had to confront often the pain of this family.
Yeah. And then just last year, A Love Song for Latasha, this Oscar-nominated documentary short, which I would highly recommend people go watch, and is really, again, about Latasha and the person at the heart of all this. All right. Well, that brings us to the end of this episode. Nicole Hemmer, thanks to you as always.
Thanks, Jody.
And Kellie Carter-Jackson, thanks to you.
My pleasure.
But why they burn out the property? That's my question.
You know how it all started? The first thing when a girl got killed from the Oriental.
March 16th, 1991. Latasha Harlins, a black teenager, is shot and killed by a Korean store owner, Sunja Do. Do is convicted of voluntary manslaughter, but is sentenced only to parole and a small fine. The black community is outraged and remembers.
What, 6 months probation? I mean, the people were pissed then.
Support for This Day in Esoteric Political History comes from Odoo. If you feel like you're wasting time and money with your current business software, or just want to know what you could be missing, then you'll need to join the millions of others who have switched to Odoo. Odoo is the affordable, all-in-one management software with a library of fully integrated business applications that help you get more done in less time for a fraction of the price. To learn more, visit odoo.com/thisday. That's odoo.com/thisday. Odoo, modern management made simple.
Radiotopia.